So we are going to kick off Design Nation with our very first keynote speaker. So for our first keynote, we have a designer who graduated from the School of Visual Arts in New York City. And after graduation, she worked as senior designer at Base Design before also working as an art director at 2x4 Incorporated and creative director at Stone Yamashita Partners. In 2010, she founded her very own design studio, Jen Works, and she also joined Pentagram as partner in 2012. Some of her past clients include Nike, Harvard Art Museums, and Chanel. Everyone, give it up for Natasha Jen.
Hello, hi, can you hear me? Yeah. Awesome, sorry, I'm just getting used to the stage. Whew, it's very early for a Saturday morning. Thank you all for coming here. I'm really excited. So my name's Natasha Jen. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the concept around polar opposites, okay, particularly in the business of design. So starting out with this slide, so many of you might be familiar with this. This is the process called design thinking. So in 2017, I gave a talk about my problem with design thinking, and somehow that talk went viral. So now, 3 years, or actually 4 years later, and particularly after the pandemic, I'm just really glad that this is over because of social distancing. So what I want to talk about is this idea of polar opposites. So I'm in the business of communication design. Pentagram is a communication design practice, and our entirety of business is really, really broad. But over the years, what I have observed is that, you know, the practice itself has become more opposites in terms of the different genres or different types of business that we do. For example, there are studios that take on very small projects, mostly, you know, printed materials, and there are agencies that take on large corporate clients. And then with this sort of division, you see that there's this sort of, you know, binary sort of situation happening. That is, as a designer or as a design practitioner, you kind of have to choose your sides. You either have to do cultural, and if you do cultural, it sometimes implies that you cannot take on corporations. You either do consumer or you focus on enterprise. And I find this sort of polar opposite situation a little bit troubling. Or you do print or you do digital. So this sort of, you know, division is getting more and more severe, you know, in recent years. But I feel like design as an act is really about problem solving. And problem solving is really broad. It means that it doesn't matter what the problems are or what the media actually are. You should be able to actually, you know, solve the problem with design. So in this sense, you know, design is really our mission. For me, design itself is my mission. I know that it sounds very strange, but think about that. You know, that is a kind of very courageous sort of belief, but yet at the same time, it brings a lot of complexities to the business side of things itself, which I will talk a little bit about. So a little bit about myself. I'm from Taiwan. This was me when I was like 6 years old. As you can tell, I was a very happy kid. Growing up in Taiwan, I was exposed to graphic design. Okay, so here is, you can see that, you know, the urban condition was saturated with signage, right? Really incredible signage. And as a kid, I didn't realize that I was exposed to typography. You know, all this is just type, right? Typefaces, different typefaces. And then Taiwan, again, it's a very small island. As you can see from this picture, this idea of intimacy is very much in the society. You know, this was before COVID, of course. You know, there was no social distancing whatsoever. But then, you know, at the same time in Taiwan, I didn't know there's this sort of typography happening, you know. So when I first came here, you know, I wasn't offended by this sort of, you know, slightly racist, you know, typography. I just thought it was really, really stupid, okay? And then fast forward to 2010. As you know, Skylar said that I came here to pursue my graphic design study, and I graduated in 2022. So in 2010, I started my own studio. As you can see, this was a really humble beginning. It was just me, working by myself with a mood board over there. And then in 2012, I was invited to join Pentagram. I don't know how many of you have heard of Pentagram. Raise your hand. Okay, not bad. Okay, thank you. So I was invited to join Pentagram, which I'll also talk a little bit about. So so as you can see here, this was me by myself, and then I joined a pretty large design institution, right? And also pretty well-known, established design business. What does that mean? Okay, I actually didn't know what that meant, until several years after being part of the company. So I want to start out with Pentagram, okay, and then I'm going to talk about the polar opposite situation. So Pentagram is a very interesting organization in that it is a unique business that's different from anything else in the world. So before I talk about Pentagram, I want to talk about our design business. So you're looking at two words here. One is studio, design studio. One is a firm, design firm, right? So these two things immediately suggest the difference in scale. Yeah, studio implies smallness, a kind of atelier. Firm, big, right? But then there's also something in the middle, a design office, right? Design office doesn't suggest scale or type of the work that they do. But then over the years, you see that this sort of business setup really changed over time. So you probably recognize this. This is IBM's logo, right? They're still using this in a lot of their communication. This is the New York subway's style guide, okay? This was designed 4 decades ago by Massimo Vanelli. Colors magazine, you guys are probably not familiar with this. This was very, very popular in the 90s, a kind of really groundbreaking publication that dealt with very difficult subjects, such as gender, such as, AIDS, which was rampant at that time. This on the left and on the right, they're both designed by Mies van der Rohe, okay? Very iconic design artifacts that you have seen in media. A table by Aaron Saarinen, okay, which still out there in the market right now, one of the most popular, modern furniture pieces. Eames chair, right? You still see these in stores in the market. So why am I talking about these things? So as you see, these really influential design artifacts, really change the time where people live, right? But they were also designed by really incredible designers. These are all designers from Paul Rand, who designed the IBM logo, who also worked with Steve Jobs. Their collaboration was really, really famous, to Massimo Vanelli. Tibor Kalman, who designed the Colors magazine, really pushing the boundary of, print design. So on and so forth. So what happened to these designers and their studios? Well, these influential designers, they all died, right? So after they died, what happened to their practice, to their business, right? So this is what I'm going to talk about. So they had really successful studios back in the day, and then the studios became more and more well-known and started to taking on bigger and bigger projects, right? So going back to this studio and firm kind of division, in our time right now, everything has become what we call an agency. We're called an agency, a design agency. But then in recent years, there's this sort of other business model that is called branding agency. So oftentimes, Pentagram is called by clients, and just by, general people, that we're a branding agency. And we do branding, okay? We do large and small scale branding, for all different industries. So I want to talk a little bit about this branding agency phenomenon. So you're looking at 5 different design firms, Pentagram being one of them, okay? Landor, Lippincott, they're all really large global, design practices, and they're colleagues that we respect a lot. But I want to talk a little bit about the difference and sort of the history. So here you're seeing the founding stories of these 5 firms, including Pentagram. So the first thing that you notice is that, wow, these firms were all established many decades ago, okay? So here you see that Landor, for example, was established in the 40s, okay? But what happened to many of them is that they got absorbed into conglomerates, okay, one by one. So here you see that these, firms, design firms that were established and led by really talented, design founders, they eventually got absorbed into conglomerates. And then actually there are 2 very large conglomerates that sort of operate, I would say 90% of the agencies, out there in the world, which I find is really interesting. So you see like a repeating story, right? That is, okay, after the design founder established the practice, so again, reputation, right? So the reputation actually brings in a lot of recognition, but then a holding company would come in and absorb, meaning bought the design studio. I'm talking about in the branding, business. But then what the holding company did after the acquisition is that it would immediately change the structure of the company. So you see that a kind of pyramid structure would emerge, right? So very tiered, very sort of, structured, going from the C level to the VP level to the director level. But if you look at the bottom level, okay, they're actually the people, including designers, doing the work itself, okay? So there's something kind of not right about this. So the benefit of this model is that because it is a pyramid, because it is very structured, because it is predictable, therefore is highly repeatable. So you can actually take this model from New York to Shanghai to Melbourne, so on and so forth, and you could establish a global business, okay? So why would conglomerates do that? They do that because they would like to scale the business. So here you see that there's sort of funny picture, right? On the left is the artist, okay, is the designer, the poor artist who doesn't know how to do business. On the right is the business people who actually know how to run a business that is running the practice itself. So by doing that, you can actually scale up the practice, right? That's something that you see conglomerates do a lot. But what happened after that is oftentimes you see that breakages begin to happen between these different governance, structures. A lot of times you see that the CEO is really disengaged from the actual work and from the people, and a lot of grievances, from the people. Or you see that the entire design group, the designers, the writers, the strategists, they feel like they're not actually being valued by the business side of things. So it's really a kind of common problem that we see in the pyramid, highly structured pyramid model. So Pentagram is very, very different. And I wouldn't say that we intentionally resisted the kind of pyramid model, but the company was founded by 5 founders in London, in 1972. They were all practicing designers already. They all had their own business. So the idea was very simple, that they wanted to come together and form what I call Designers Republic, okay? So the premise of this model is that each of them will still remain independent as a designer and as a design leader, meaning that each of them could still make decisions on what types of work that they would like to do and what kind of business that each of them would like to have. But they share common resources. That's a simple part to it. I'm gonna continue to the little bit complicated part to it. So this model, as I said, started out with 5 designers, right, joining together. It's a kind of loose, partnership. But what's really kind of interesting about this loose partnership is that it grew, okay, and allows for growth for more partners to join over time. Okay, so here you see that, it's like a necklace, right? There are more and more, gems coming in. And then this model, again, you see, because we're all different, okay? So it's like a necklace that has many different, gems, right? Each one is unique. So each of us would actually lead a team of designers producing very different profits. Okay, so think about that. It's one company called Pentagram, run by different partners. Each partner is a kind of autonomous business group, okay? Because what I want to do is ultimately different, right? Okay, different profits, there are bigger profits or smaller profits, big deal, you may say. But what happens after that is all the profits that are produced by different teams and different partners would get aggregated into one total sum, and that total sum would then get redistributed equally back to each team. So that's a socialist model. So it doesn't matter if I'm making money or I'm losing money, everybody is making the same money, okay? After all, you will go, wow, you know, how does that actually work? Well, it actually works because upon joining a company or before you join the partnership, you really have to embrace this idea that on a day-to-day level, we're practicing as capitalists, but then essentially our business model is a socialist model, and you gotta be totally cool with the idea of sharing, okay? But then yet at the same time, nobody wants to actually practice a business that loses money. So there's that kind of pride that also drives our decision too. So here you see that things get a little bit complicated because there's the stuff that you would like to work on, but then there's also the business consideration. It's mostly about like just wanting to contribute and being fair, right, to the others. So you always have to struggle, these two very different things as a Pentagram partner. So how do we make decisions? We don't have a CEO. We make decisions by different committees, and committees would then report back to the total partnership. So this model over time has allowed for growth very organically. For example, we started in London, but then the New York office was established in the early 90s, just very organically. We now have offices in London, New York, Austin, who is run by one partner from Austin because he wanted to go home, therefore he just opened up a Pentagram studio there. So over time, as you can see, that our partnership grew, and I joined in 2012. So this sort of model still continues despite that we have more and more partners, becoming part of the family. So you're seeing like these two very different architecture comparison, right? On the left is the necklace, which is soft, which allows for growth. It's socialist, but yet at the same time, it allows for total freedom to do what you want to do. On the right is a kind of typical agency model. So it's kind of unbelievable to me that as a practitioner who is doing branding, who's also competing with, these really great other agencies, we're actually able to continue to practice in this way. And it actually allows us to actually choose very different types of projects, which is something that I'm gonna get to. So I'm gonna talk about 3 projects. They're wildly different, okay? And they're sort of the byproducts of our business model. They're wildly different in nature, they're wildly different in scale, they're wildly different in the situations in which they were created. So the first project was a big question that we wanted to answer for this project. That is, what if we can architect the whole thing? Okay, what is the whole thing? What is this project? Okay, it's Waze. Who has used Waze here? Oh, wow, okay, a lot of you, right? If you drive, you probably are a Waze user. So as you know, Waze is a really kind of interesting innovation in that it gamified the driving experience. So there's that part, okay, you can choose your avatar, but yet at the same time, it provides really accurate real-time road condition reports, okay? And how do they actually do that? They do that by allowing their drivers to actually update real road conditions while they're driving. So you see that this is a very, interesting invention in that it kind of takes on the idea of Google Maps, but then at the same time, it added this sort of very human element to it. So when we were approached by Waze, this was in early 2019, Okay, so they wanted to overhaul the brand, but keeping some really important elements that are very, very dear to them. So we looked at the brand itself. We're like, okay, this is an app ultimately, but we also understood that there's a lot more outside of the app, when it comes to branding. There are a lot of different communications, there's social media, there's advertising, right? And let's just look at their current design. So we always start out our process with what we call a design audit. That just to look at what's happening, okay, with the brand design. So here you see that in 2019, they had this logo, which was very dear to them, that they called the Wazer, okay? It's that little white creature. And then it goes with, this really chubby logo type, okay? But then we noticed that, okay, there's another app that's called Waze Ride, okay, and eventually it was called Carpool. So we immediately recognized that there's something that's emerging, right? But yet at the same time, they had a lot of different things going on. Mostly their outreach programs, For example, Waze Local, like what is that, right? So we're trying to actually decipher what's going on with these different things. Yet at the same time, we noticed that their users, particularly their map editors, okay, so there is a really large community of people editing Waze's maps, okay, around the world in real time. They really like to do stuff with the Wazer, okay? So you can see that, yeah, one was, styled as a firefighter, so on and so forth. And then we looked at the typography, the first thing that we noticed that is it feels really ordinary, yeah, and there are many different typefaces that were used at the same time, there wasn't a lot of, good hierarchy, a lot of illustration, really, really inventive illustrations, but yet at the same time, there isn't a singular style that tie these illustrations together. And what was also very interesting about Waze at that time was they had very little distinction between illustrations and icons, okay, just because the brand itself was, envisioned with a lot of these very figurative and pictorial things, right? So we noticed that, okay, so this, wild illustrations also permeated into the icons, which should actually be a lot more functional than just being illustrative, okay? So zooming out, wow, we got a lot of, just messy stuff to figure out, okay? And the stuff lives in the app, also lives outside of the app. How do we do that? So we first start out with the logo, the Wazer. So one thing that they told us, they said, okay, we trust you guys, do whatever you want, but please don't kill the Wazer, And I was like, well, we have no reason to kill it, okay? It's recognizable, but we need to kind of like give it a facelift, okay? So that's really what we did. Okay, I'm gonna show you the facelift, but the first thing that we wanted to do is to really kind of shift the look and feel of the logo type, which is the name itself. So the logo type was set in a really rounded, chubby typeface. So we're like, well, Waze, you're a tech company and you're really, innovative tech company, but your logo type just looks like any of those, food or pet brands, you don't want to do that, right? You don't want to be there. They're like, oh my God, yeah, let's just, move away from this chubby typeface. So that was great. So what we did was that we created this really, I would say clean, but good looking, okay, logo type. And this typeface later on would permeate into the app itself and everything else. So what I want to do is to find a logo type that can actually stand by itself, okay, and looks good, but yet at the same time is hyper functional. So we wanted to bring in a little bit that sort of rounded quality, the friendliness. So by rounding the corners of the type, we're able to do that. So now let's look at the Wazer. So what we did was that this, like I said, we gave it a facelift, okay? So we brought in a grid, yeah, here's the grid, So this grid would then later on become the basis of everything. So you see that we really kind of look at where to place the face features, how do we actually place the two wheels. But what was kind of nice while we were doing that is that we recognized that the shape of the Wazer is actually a speech bubble. You know, that's really, really cool because we can actually use a speech bubble for a lot of things. So this is a before and after. So in a way, you know, it's not that big a change, you know, just from the look and feel. Yet at the same time, it's fundamental change, okay? So we always like to do this sort of thing that is, you know, using grid, using math to create a kind of shaping, okay, that still looks like the original thing, but yet at the same time, it's architecturally very different. So going back to the speech bubble. So here you see that the speech bubble can then get extended to, you know, contain different messages here. So yeah, you see that it's really, really useful. It's also good for their email signature. So this is the app icon, very simple. You know, we kept the blue, but we use a brighter, more cleaner blue. And for the carpool app, what we did was that instead of creating a different Wazer, we just put two Wazers together because that's really the idea of a carpooling, right? Very, very simple. Okay, so that's great. I want to go back to this grid. Okay, so you see that this square-based grid really became the blueprint for everything else, from illustrations to icons to the overall design system. So we're able to actually redraw all these avatars. You know, they were called the moods. They live in the app itself that you as a driver, you can choose these different moods, you know, that you are in. We're also able to change the in-app icons. You see that these icons, they all follow exactly the same design language. Yeah, so you see that these Wazers, not Wazers, moods, you know, they become unified, yeah, because they were all drawn and redrawn based on that grid, okay? So these are some early examples that we did, okay, just to kind of put, you know, the design elements together to see a new, different look and feel. But we also recognize that we needed something else, okay? So it's not just about putting a new logo on the lower left in the poster. We want to create something that's like really meta. Okay, so based on this blueprint, the grid, we created this design system, which is using color blocks, okay, to create, first of all, an organizing system, yet at the same time, it gives you a very specific look and feel. And we call this system block by block, okay, which is very good for Waze, right, conceptually. So here you see that this system, again, it gives Waze a kind of, you know, shifted look and feel, right? You recognize that it's Waze. It kept the original elements, but everything was sort of, you know, redrew very nicely. It also works really well for the carpool app. So we got really nerdy with explaining the block by block, like how it works. You know, as you know, like we know how to design these things, but once the design is passed on to a client side, a lot of times people are just like, what? You know, so we had to like do a lot of this sort of instructional manual, okay, just to show them, hey, this is how you can slice, you know, a rectangle to actually create more blocks. You can get more and more pictorial if you want, but you can also stay very simple. So we also did this slider. I mean, basically you see how a rectangle can actually become this block by block system, right? So when they saw this, they got it. They were like, oh, wow, this is really cool. But how do we do rounded corners, you know? So we had to actually assign a very specific method to create a rounded corners. Okay, so this sort of manual just went on and on and on. You can actually do it horizontally. You can do it vertically. It's really versatile. It totally works. So this is an animation that shows the before and after, okay, of Waze. So you see that the block by block was new. The moods were not new. The icons were not new, but they were redesigned. Yeah. So as you can see here, so the block by block approach really created a unification, okay, for the brand across different media touch points, from the websites to social media. It worked perfectly for Instagram, for example, because Instagram by itself is a grid-based app to begin with, right? And we also did a lot of examples just to show them how to marry copywriting with the design system, with the Wazers as well. Here you see that, before and after of their monthly e-newsletter. So you see that there's a real impact, right, of this design. Everything just became a lot more clear, a lot better organized. Swag, of course, we always want to give people some fun things. And then I want to end this project with this 3D animation that we did just as an experiment, okay? This never got used in their marketing, but I'm just going to share with you here. Is there sound to this? There's actually sound to, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so that's for Waze. Now, let's go to the opposite, okay? From 150 million users, global brand, to a small but very important New York cultural organization, okay? So this project happened in December 2020, okay? During like the worst time of the pandemic. Before I talk about the project, I want to talk about the institution. So the organization is called Storefront for Art and Architecture. And we have been working, collaborating with Storefront for 10 years now on a pro bono basis. Okay, so they're located in downtown Manhattan in Soho. And you can see from this picture that the architecture of the place is really, really unique. The facade is designed by the famous architect Stephen Hall, as well as Vito Acconci. So they redesigned this facade to make it this sort of panel-based wall. Okay, so it's a wall, but yet at the same time, it has many doors as well as many windows all together, right? So it's a really long, facade, and the inside is a really, really small triangular space. So as I said, we've been working with Storefront for 10 years now. We've worked on so many projects together, from big and small. This was the project for the Venice Biennale for the American Pavilion. It was actually a competition that we together submitted, okay, and then we won the pavilion design. So this took place in 2014 in Venice. Here you see that it was a poster that we did to talk about, what's going on in the in our exhibition. You see a very complicated diagram. This is a summary that talked about 100 years of American architecture as exports, meaning designing architecture in other countries, okay, in a nutshell. We also designed and produced 3 books, over the course of 6 years that all stemmed out from, from this pavilion project, really, really labor-intensive work. We also designed identities for their exhibitions. Here, this was an exhibition that not only we designed the identity, but we also designed the actual exhibition. As you know, exhibition design for small cultural institutions tend to have very little budget, okay? Sometimes it's 20,000 that you have to produce everything, right? So we, did this pretty interesting work under a lot of budgetary constraints. So this is another view of the exhibition. You see that we're using these cylinders, as a display mechanism. We also designed a typeface for the exhibition, for the exhibition's identity, which we saw. But then this project, again, extended into a publication design. There was another book that went on for another 2 years. So I'm just trying to tell you the amount of work that we created for Storefront. But every project was extremely fun. This was the identity for their 2019 and also 2020 curatorial program for the whole year. So the idea was that we will actually create one typeface that can actually morph, okay, from circular to rectangular to hexagon-based over 5 different episodes throughout the whole year. So this is the design of that typeface. Yeah, so as you can see here, right, we had a lot of fun with these, and we always try to design typeface for everything that we did for Storefront. This was the identity for their 2019 spring benefits. So spring benefits are really important fundraising opportunities for Storefront. They would invite, their members to come to the party, and that would be a really big fundraising opportunities for them. However, that changed in 2020, okay, because COVID broke out in spring 2020. So there was no spring benefit for Storefront in 2020. And it was a really, really terrible year, not just for Storefront, but for everybody. But cultural institutions really suffered too, during that time because, everybody just couldn't go to these places anymore, right? So by the end of the year, Storefront, they still wanted to continue the benefit, right, as a fundraising opportunity, but they had a really, really creative idea at that time. So first of all, they were told by one of the members on the board that Storefront had to remove all the stuff that is stored in this board member's warehouse. He had a really large storage, over many years, okay? So the board member was like, I'm getting rid of this warehouse, this storage. You got all this stuff here, please take it, okay? So Storefront was like, okay, we got a lot of stupid stuff there, and I just want to show you like this stuff, okay? This is like before the stuff was unboxed, okay? So it's all this stuff, like a lot of silly things, like construction stuff over time, toilet paper, duct tape, so on and so forth. So Storefront had a really creative idea. That was, okay, we're in a really hard time right now. People are no longer in the city. We want to bring them back. We want them to come to Storefront. We want to raise some money. We got a pile of stuff here. What do we do? Okay. So their idea was to turn the stuff into pieces of artworks for sale. Okay. So they invited 26 architects and architecture studios and designers. Each one was assigned with some stuff, okay, found from this warehouse to create a piece of artwork, okay? So the artworks would be for sale, and the profit from the sales would become, the fund for next year's operation. So I just want to show you before, I want to show you the artwork, but where will we display the artworks, right? So Storefront invited 2 architects based in Mexico to design these display tables. As you can see, these tables are very simple, kiddo parts, just, wood panels put together. But then the panels these panels would make these tables, and these tables can actually run in the storefront gallery space. So you see this triangle shape is the floor plan of Storefront, okay? It has a really funky wedge kind of like space, But this green, the role of the green tables can actually work really, really well. You see, like there's a kind of strong visual presence, right? So each artwork would actually sit on top of the table. So these are some stuff, okay, that was actually created by the really creative 26 participating architecture studios. They literally just took, all the junk in the warehouse and transformed them into something unique and one of a kind, okay? So these pieces were up for sale. So we were asked to design the identity for this initiative, okay? So I was thinking that, okay, so this is sort of like clearing the house, you know, like everything must go, right, kind of situation. So we're very inspired by this sort of, you know, street vernacular, and this is something that everybody is familiar with, right? This sort of, you know, store, you know, is closing, everything must go posters. And there's something that's very particular about these posters is that, first of all, they're always just typographic, okay? And they tend to use very condensed typefaces, because when the typeface is condensed, you can actually stretch it all the way up to actually make the type really, really big. We're like, okay, so that can be, you know, our design elements, you know, but then we probably need to change the colors to actually have a color that works with that, you know, with the tables really well. So we use green, okay? So what we did was that we picked, you know, 4 typefaces in total. So this is one family, you know, really condensed typeface coin, okay? And then we also picked 3 other typefaces. So basically it's 4 typefaces that would do the whole job, okay? So here you see that what we did was we created the identity. It's called resource, you know, so it's a pun, right? We're being very resourceful. We're, you know, recycling the stuff. And then the typefaces can actually mix and match, yeah, to create this sort of really playful, you know, kind of street vernacular. But then you see that for all the different architects' posters, we just used the same 4 typefaces to design all these posters, yeah? It's like a big sale, right? Celebrating, you know, all these amazing, very creative architects doing the work. So here you see that, yeah, we created this series of posters. Each one is uniquely designed, but yet at the same time, we're just working with the same 4 typefaces, okay? So what's really interesting about this approach is that, well, first of all, it helped reopen storefront, okay? Hey guys, we got this, you know, amazing exhibition happening right now, you know, come take a look and you can purchase the artwork. But yet at the same time, it created a really, really strong urban identity for a storefront. And during that time, I think it was very meaningful, you know, for them, you know, because the city was quiet, you know, people were staying at home. So this gesture kind of really invited people to come out, you know, and to check out storefront. Yeah, I'm just gonna click through some of these other slides here. And the whole thing was very economically produced, you know, as you can see. All we had to do was to print out these posters, and we actually literally, we physically pasted them, you know, with storefront, you know. So here you see that we're very, very hands-on, you know, in a lot of projects that we do. So here you see it goes on and on and on and on and on. I probably have to cut this short because I'm gonna advance to my last project, okay? Something, again, wildly different, okay? It's for a tech startup that's called Light Matter. What do they do? They are a photonic computing company based in Boston. They're founded by 2 MIT PhDs in computer science, and they have cracked something that computer scientists were trying to figure out for decades. I'm gonna talk about what they do. So photonic computing, nobody, I mean, unless you're in the field of computational study, nobody knows what photonic computing actually is. I don't think that I know a lot. I just know the difference between photonic computing and electron-based computing, which is what we use currently. Okay, so this was their website when we first talked to them, you know. So first thing that we recognize that there's some shapes in the background. Do they mean anything? Okay, they actually mean something, which is actually exemplified in the logo. Okay, I'm gonna talk about that. But the copy said accelerating artificial intelligence with light. Okay, so we figured that there's something about AI here, right? So the very problem that photonic computing can solve is that because the demand of AI training is so rapid, it has actually outpaced Moore's law, which is that the speed of transistors would double every I think once every 2 years. So right now, the demand of AI training actually outpaced Moore's law, which is really a law that governs computing, right? So what is the solution here? So the solution is photonic computing because they're using photons to transmit data. So photons doesn't have a physical property to it. It's light, okay? It's incredibly fast. It also goes all different directions because it's light, right? So it's very good for AI training. So here you see that it's an article from the New York Times, I think in the, sorry, I cannot read the date here. I think it's from the 80s. It's something that computer scientists had been trying to figure out how to actually make it work, okay? As a theory, it worked, but then they couldn't figure out how to make it work. Light matter figured out how to actually make it work. This was their logo, and as you know, when you work with an organization that has an existing logo, you have to be really careful about that. Don't just throw it away, right? So I asked the founders, does this mean anything to you? They're like, oh yeah, the paths that you see here in the negative space is actually the way that photons travel, yeah? They converge, they go parallel, and then they diverge. Okay, I was like, does this mean, what do you want to keep this? They said, no, we want something cool. We're like, okay, we'll give you something cool. Photons, they don't have any shape and form. Light, no shape and form. AI, no shape and form. What do I actually do here, right? I mean, it was really like frightening because the subject matter itself doesn't have anything that you can actually, grasp onto. So, okay, we looked into a lot of the kind of, historical materials, like Amazing Stories, one of the earliest, sci-fi magazine, Omni, which was sort of like the precedent of Wire magazine, in the 80s. We're just really, inspired by the visual, which is really exuberant, back in the day. And then we did a lot of study on AI, like how AI actually learns, So in a nutshell, AI learning or AI training is pretty much about how we learn. That is by connecting the dots together, okay, and then use logic to make sense out of it. But these dots, they don't make sense totally, but it's just that sort of putting together, basically, reasons. That's how AI is trained. So we thought that, well, why don't we take that idea, okay, in the typography? That is, we understand here, you look at the letter L, the letter M, right? You know this is the L and the M because that's what you learned, right? But what if can actually change something in the design of the alphabets to the point where they're kind of distant from the way they look, So we want to actually introduce curvature into these rectilinear letters. So here you see that the L gets bended, I was very happy to do that because I have to say, if you look at the letter L, it's really the most boring letter, uppercase L. So is lowercase L, it's basically a straight line, right? Really, really boring letters that, that we wanted to change. Okay, so we created a whole typeface. So typeface actually has normal letters, yeah? And then it also has this alternate, set that has all these curves introduced to it. So we call this typeface inference sense. So this inference sense, this bespoke typeface created the logo type, okay? There's no icon, no pictorial icons to it, but the type itself really suggests what light matter does, what training AI is all about. But here you see that the type is also very legible. It's all uppercase only, but it's super legible as a headline. So these are some early sketches that we did. This was before we did a computer design, which we did, and also before we did photography, but we kind of just want to, project a kind of look and feel, and using, found visuals, right? So this is what we ended up with. You see that it's really close to our original vision. So we also designed their computers, the chips, the computers, the processors, everything. My partner, John Marshall, who's an industrial design partner, designed these things. So here you see that the type itself can work really powerfully, as an architectural element, but it also looks super beautiful on a piece of, small computers. So now going to colors, right? And again, light itself doesn't have colors. So we had to go back to some visual references to draw color cues. So here you see that we're looking at very bright cyan and magenta and red color, right? So we thought that, okay, we can actually take these colors to create a very simple but a little bit kind of retro futuristic color palette for them. So these colors work very beautifully for their diagrams. These are the real diagrams that we helped created. And then we kind of continue with this retro, futuristic look and using 8-bit as a design language to create all the icons. So you see that there's a little bit collage work happening here, right? There's inference. We use that to create bespoke type. There's a retro futuristic, color palette, and continue with that. We continue to adapt 8-bit design language here, but it's a kind of thread of thinking that continues. We also did a lot of fun things here. For example, the picture that you see on the right is actually the first robot in the history of cinema, okay, from this movie Metropolis, okay, so we drew a robot, right? It's all about artificial intelligence, with this 8-bit design language, so it created a lot of fun things for them. Also created this other illustration, is sort of going to the moon, very ambitious, that kind of encapsulates what I do with photonic computing. And then quick overview on the website. So we created this 3D model of their logo type, a giant leap. We also did all the copywriting here for them. So it's really nice to see, language, copywriting and typography and videography, they all work together. More website moments here. So anyways, so I just showed you 3 wildly different design projects, and as you can see here, they don't fit into either this side or that side. They don't belong to the polar opposites, but they actually exist, very vaguely in between these spaces, and that's the kind of work that I would love to continue to do. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much to Natasha for delivering that wonderful keynote. We will now be opening up the floor to audience Q&A. So as mentioned before in the GroupMe, if you guys have any questions you would like to personally ask Natasha, feel free to message that in the Slido. Just make sure to include your name as well, just so we can call you up to ask her. So for the very first question we have, can you discuss what the process was like and some of the challenges associated with establishing your very own design studio?
There are multiple levels of challenges, right? One is always, about really identifying the type of work that you would like to do and the type of work that you haven't done before, but you would like to take on. And that can be a pretty scary thing because every time you enter a very different type of work, the learning curve is profound, right? So there's that part that has to do with me, being a designer, being somebody who considers my work as a kind of, artwork, right? But it has functions to it. So there's that side, but there's also the business side of things, which is really about how to make it a sustainable business. So these two desires, they don't necessarily go together. There's a lot of conflict that you have to resolve, and that's something that I think every design practitioner is always trying to resolve. It doesn't matter how long you've been in the practice, So yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, so for our next question, can we have Cara Clemens come up here to ask her question?
Hi. My question was, how do you go about getting inspiration when you're working on projects that you might be less excited about, or working with companies in an industry that you don't know as much about, like photonic computing, for example?
Yeah, well, good question. I mean, I get asked this question a lot. Where do you get inspirations, right? So here's the thing. When when you're really obsessed about something, your mind doesn't stop. It's very hard to say that, oh, I do X, Y, Z to get inspirations. Because when you're thinking about it, you're pretty much on it the whole time. And you begin to actually see things. You will either search for things, right, to kind of give you ideas, and it's always really broad, You begin to see things that somehow relate to the thing that you're thinking about. I'm serious, it's really weird. Right now, for example, we're working on several crypto companies. They're wildly different, okay? Consumer stuff, institutional things. There's now like DeFi. DeFi is really complicated. So I just sign on to a bunch of crypto newsletter websites, and I just read as much as I can, and I ask questions, to people who know better than me. So what I'm saying is that when you really want to answer something, the learning or the desire to learn will just motivate you to just find answers from anywhere and everywhere. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so for our next question, we have Bruvi Gupta. And for those audience members that are wishing to ask questions, there are microphones, set up.
I had a question about with Waze. You mentioned how the 3D video wasn't used in the end. In such cases, what do you suggest is the best way to probably make the best out of it instead of just putting it in the portfolio? Is there something that you can learn out of those elements for next projects?
Good question. Well, I guess the learning is not so much from a technical level because, we can do 3D, right? We can do 3D animations. The learning is more about perhaps opening up the conversation with a client about any work that is not on their agenda. They all have very clear agenda, how they're gonna go about their marketing program, the materials that they need. But if you're thinking about, in this case, it was me, right? Thinking about that, oh, this thing will be so cool to have, right? So I guess, the mistake that I did was that I didn't actually bring it up earlier to them because I wanted to actually get that work done, right? And I think that, if I show them this finished, 3D thing, it would just be so irresistible that they were just gonna put it on TV, right? It was wishful thinking. So what I'm saying is that, I think that, you need a level of naivete to actually be happy as a designer, yeah. But you can't get too naive, right? So in my case, I was just probably carried away too much, right? So they looked at it, they were like, oh, this is so cool, but guess what? It's not in our marketing program, goodbye. So now I'm showing it to you here, yeah. So that's my answer.
All right, so for our next question, can we have Janelle Heisen step up to the microphone?
Gotta remember my question. All right. Hi, my name is Janelle. First of all, thank you so much for speaking today. I really enjoyed your presentation. It was really nice to hear about agency and all the different kind of approaches to it, and also about your work. I think it's amazing. So my question is, you wear a lot of hats in your work. What steps did you take as a younger designer to be now confident in taking on a variety of different projects?
Can you repeat the question again?
Sure, let me rephrase it as well. So you seem to wear a lot of different types of hats and also interact with a lot of different types of mediums, varying from logo design, branding, and also working with, like you mentioned, typography, and also working with different types of clients as well. So what steps did you take when you were learning or a younger designer to now feel confident working in different types of mediums and maybe also areas that you aren't as familiar in? So how did you learn, and maybe, is there any advice that you might have for us?
Oh, that's interesting. So when I started out as a designer after I graduated, I was very clear about that I didn't want to just do one thing, okay? I didn't want to, one thing can be, for example, one type of design, okay? That is, for example, website design or book design. I didn't want to just do one thing. I was very clear about that. I was also very clear about that I didn't want to work in-house. When you work in-house for a company, for a brand, your subject matter is narrowed down to that one thing, right? For example, I don't know, working at Google, working at Apple, they're all great jobs. But for me, I really just wanted to do all sort of different things. Was it rational? I don't think so, because in-house jobs I think still pay just a little bit better, right, than being a designer at a design studio. But I was very committed to what I wanted to do. So I only worked at design studios, right? And after I, worked at a couple of different places, that was 9 years working as a designer in 3 different companies. I recognized that, again, I didn't want to go in-house. I didn't want to do one thing. Therefore, how do I do it? I do my thing, engine works. So there was a kind of that very clear intuition, that sort of just helped me, paved my path. It wasn't totally strategic, but it was just following, what I really wanted to do. And of course, you may want to just pursue a really focused practice, and that's totally cool too, So when you're laser focused, just go after that thing, There's no trick to this,
All right, okay, so for our next question, we have one from Zoe Zhu.
Thank you, Natasha. It's very exciting. I have been fans of you for a long time. I have read the story of Waze, but this time when I repeated to read it again, I was feel so excited about it. So my question is about how do you find the right teammate for your in the team? So you know that at the beginning of design, it's very vague. You don't know what you're gonna produce and how to fit the teammate skill set. So curious about how you find the right people working on the project.
That's a great question. So finding talents, right, and recruiting them to join my team, as well as, cultivating them, right, making sure that they're very satisfied with the work. You see that there's a lot involved in what I called talent management. Well, first of all, I think it's hard to find the right designers. Okay, when I say the right designers, it's not just about skill sets, it's about sensibilities. Sensibilities are very hard to actually articulate, skill sets is something that you can list, right, in a job description. Oh, you need to, be able to do, Cinema 4D, Adobe, Suite, these are skill sets. The thing about skill sets is that skills can be learned by anybody if they want to learn. And skills are highly replaceable, meaning I can learn how to do InDesign, so can you, right? So when we are both at the same skill level, what actually differentiates us? That's what I mean by sensibilities. It's very hard to find designers that you feel like, hey, this individual sensibility can actually contribute a lot to our work. That's where the nuances really happen. So I think I'm very lucky in that I've always had, and I still have, an amazing team. I have a small team, 8 to 9 designers. That's always the size that I'm comfortable with. And with this group of designers, we're able to actually do a lot of work. For example, the Waze project, right? For a really large global brand, the team itself was just myself and then 3 designers, So we're able to operate that way, But for the storefront project, it was me and 2 other designers. So you see that they all have sensibilities that I feel can work with, the design language, of my practice, How do I find them? My God, I mean, it's hard, you put out job posts. There's no trickery to this because it's not like they're all in one repository that you can just go, pick them up. So there's a lot of luck involved too, word of mouth, schools, looking at portfolios, job posts, yeah. Okay?
All right, so we have approximately 6 minutes left. So for anyone that has any questions, make sure to send them in now. Next, we have a question from Elizabeth Olshanetsky.
So my question kind of relates to the last one. On the team, does everyone kind of know how to do everything, or do you all like specialize? Like somebody's good at like 3D stuff, somebody's good at like the typography and all that.
That's a great question. So yeah, it's sort of like, you guys know the A-Team, right? That TV show, right? I always say running a design team is very much like building an A-team. Okay, first of all, the chemistry has to be there. They have to like each other, and that is hard to control. Okay, especially like during COVID when everybody was working remote. The only way we communicated was first of all through Slack, okay, and secondly through Zoom. And when you show up on Zoom, everybody's on mute, like. Like that in a rectangle, like you can't really build chemistry, through Zoom or Slack, right? But now we're back to the office doing hybrid, so that has actually improved a lot. There's chemistry, but there's also, like you said, there's strength. Yeah, designers do have different strengths. Yeah, sometimes it's driven by skill sets. For example, say one can be really passionate about animation, right? And he or she would just, get really good with that thing. Some are really passionate about typography, and they would just learn how to do type design on their own, right? So when I'm hiring or when I'm reviewing designers' work, I try to actually identify just from the work in front of me what their real strength is and how that strength can contribute to the team. But everybody is a good generalist. Overall, that is basically they're all great with form making. They're all great with concepting. They're all pretty good with typography. Some are really good with creating bespoke typefaces. So yeah, like figuring out their strength and then putting together the right strengths for the right project. Yeah, is important. Yeah.
All right, so for our second to last question, we have one from Elizabeth Costina.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this, and I especially enjoyed your kind of definition of binaries. I think it's a really fascinating distinction. And I think my question relates mostly to complexity in design, because it's very easy, I think, to appreciate the work you've shown us, especially after hearing you talk about it and kind of explaining the methodology and the systems that went into it. And so how do you balance the complexity of the design with kind of the public comprehension of the design and then the company's appreciation of your work? So are you serving ultimately the company and kind of how they're satisfied with the cleverness of it, or is it more for the public? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I really believe that, branding in some ways is about creating a kind of, I think, exterior work, that, helps to elevate the company or the brand, right? But I really believe that in order to be good and look good and work well on the outside, that is the exterior, that's the public-facing part, you have to start out from the inside, which is that the company, the organization itself, they has to, first of all, understand why they're doing this. If the motivation is just about like, hey, we just want to change a logo here, right? But you see that if the design system has a lot of broken pieces or a lot of, very muddy areas, a logo change is never gonna be able to elevate the whole system, right? So I think that for me, I always make sure that I identify the client's motivation really well upfront before we take on the project. Once we know that that's what they're committed to, we have a better time doing the project, and we can succeed, yeah, a lot better than say, you know, those who just want like a really quick logo fix. Or sometimes, you know, people don't really know what they want. It happens, you know. So trying to really diagnose, like, what's the problem with your current design? Like, why don't you like it? I just feel like I've actually learned hard lessons, yeah, before by not able to identify the motivation. And, you know, we started doing the design, and then they hated it, and then we failed over and over again, revised over and over again, they still hated it. I've gone through enough of that now that I would really press our potential client, okay, on, for example, their logo. What's wrong with it? If they actually cannot tell me what they think is wrong with it, I wouldn't actually design it. You know what I mean? Like, there's no problem to be solved here. You gotta actually tell me what you see is wrong here, right? So that actually gives us an entry point. Yeah, I think getting that entry point is really important. But again, going back from, you gotta start out from the inside in order to actually look good on the outside. And that was really the thing that we're trying to re-articulate over and over again with Waze too. Waze was, when we were working with them in 2019, I don't know how big they have grown. They were actually a really small organization. Yeah, part of the team was based in Tel Aviv. That's their product team. And the marketing team in the US was relatively new, right? And they were also trying to work together. And a lot of the marketing stuff that they were using at that time was actually created by the product team, okay? So that's why you see a lot of really fun illustrations, animations, you know, really creative, but they were not the branding people, yeah. So we're trying to actually communicate that, hey, we respect your spirit, you're super inventive, we're gonna keep that, but we're gonna just help you straighten out the whole system, yeah. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, unfortunately, we're all out of time for questions, but thank you so much to Natasha for
Thank
delivering
you.
that
Thanks,
wonderful
everyone.
keynote.